Okay, so we're today in page 382. 382. Right, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, Belo Rav. Now, we said yesterday that Rav said that there was a contradiction between two Braitot. One Braita, on page 2b, says that the height of the crossbeam of a Mavoi above 20 amot is invalid, just like the height of the entrance to the sanctuary. So Rav understood that this Braita obviously means that that's the source. The source for this limit of height is from the entrance to the sanctuary. But yet another Braita said on page 3a1, that if there's a maltera, if there's such a prominence above the lintel, so then it could even be higher than 20 amot, even though the entrance to the sanctuary was with such a prominence and was not above 20 amot. So that's a contradiction that Rav said. Now comes Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak and says that without Rav's explanation, there's no contradiction. Below Rav, without the assertion of Rav, that the sages derive their ruling from the sanctuary entranceway, matnaita adade lo kashian, there's no contradiction between the two braitot, because we can say that lerabanan, those sages, what's the reason for this crossbeam that cannot be above 20 amot? Mishum Mekeira, it's for it to be a reminder, to differentiate between the private domain, the mavoi, and the public domain. So according to them, above 20 amot, people do not notice things. It's not so noticeable. That's why it's invalid. And the fact that the Braita mentions the entranceway of the sanctuary is not to say that that's their source. It's not because that's where they derived it from. Simana be'alma, it's just a mnemonic to facilitate, remembering that the maximum height of a korah is 20 amot, just like the height of the entrance to the sanctuary, but it's not to say that this is their source. And if that's the reason, so then if there's such a prominence which attracts the eye, so then it could even be above 20 amot. Okay, so this is telling us that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak holds that the purpose of this crossbeam is just to serve as a reminder. It should be noticeable for people to notice that there's a border between the mavoi, the alleyway, and the public domain outside it. And now there's a question, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Hanicha I lo svira le'ad Rabba. If he does not hold like Rabba, like the way Rabba explained the ruling in Sukkah, then fine, there's no question. But if he holds what Rabba said in Masechet Sukkah, the Amar Rabba, Ktiv leman yed'u dorotechem ki vasukot toshavti, the mitzvah of Sukkah is that a person must be aware, notice that he's dwelling in a Sukkah, and that's the reason for the maximum height of 20 amot of the schach, because ad 20 amah, up to 20 amot, Adam yodea shedar besukkah. A person is mindful that he's dwelling in a Sukkah, because he notices that there's a schach. If the height of the schach is above 20 amot, it's not noticeable. Because the eye does not notice the schach. So if he holds that, so then it emerges that it's exactly the same reasoning for our ruling in our Mishnah for the crossbeam and for the schach of the sukkah. It's exactly the same dispute, the same point of dispute. And if so, it's an argument about noticeability. So if why do they need to argue in both places, in the beginning of Masechet Sukkah and the beginning of Masechet eruvin? Exactly the same dispute. The sages say that only up to 20 amot a person notices, both here and there, the beam and the schach, and Rabbi Yehuda says even above 20 amot. So why do they need to argue in both places? The answer is that it's needed. Tzricha. If the Mishnah had told us this dispute in the case of Sukkah, we could have thought, okay, there, Be'aka Amar Rabbi Yehuda, there Rabbi Yehuda says that the person could notice the schach even above 20 amot, because the Sukkah is made for dwelling, for stationary activities. When a person stays a longer time, lingers in a place, so then naturally he also looks around to see what's on top, and then he would notice the schach even above 20 amot. But shalta be'eina. Aval mavoi, but mavoi, the leilu chavid, which is made for walking through, and when a person walks through, he does not notice things that are outside his field of view, right? So Ema, you could have thought, maybe we could have thought Rabbi Yehuda would admit to the sages that above 20 amot, a person would not notice the crossbeam. On the other side, if the Mishnah had told us the dispute over here, we could have thought, okay, here the sages say that the limit is 20 amot, because since a person walks through the mavoi, he does not tend to notice things above that height. But in case of sukkah, that a person sits there and lingers there, we could have thought the sages admit to Rabbi Yehuda that it could be even above 20 amot, because a person would look around and see. There's a blue light, a yellow light. You can notice different things. That's why we need both disputes. Yeah, 20 amot is a standard field of view. That everybody, even if you walk, you notice that. That's what it says. Oh, so that's a dispute later. The Gemara later brings that dispute. But we just said that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak holds that the purpose of the crossbeam is for it to be noticeable, to serve like a sign, like a border between the mavoi and the public domain. And now the question is, we mentioned this prominence. And what is it? Maya Maltera, what is a prominence? What singular features of the crossbeams that cover the antechamber entranceway made them especially noticeable? So that's also a dispute. Rav Chama Brei de Rabba Baravu Amar Kinei was birds' nests, cornices resembling birds' nests. Yeah, right, decoration, shape, yeah. They protruded from the lintel of the antechamber entranceway. Another opinion was Ki ata Rav Dimi Amar Amri b'Ma'arava. They said in Eretz Israel, Paskei de Arza, cedar poles, long poles of cedar thrust into the wall, and since their length is noticeable, people see them, and there's a reminder. Good. That's a dispute. What is it that attracts the eye? No. Lechi stands upright. This was lying on the lintel. Yeah, here it's like it's horizontal, right? Horizontal. Manda Amal Paske de Arza, the one who says that it refers to cedar poles, which are less noticeable than these birds' nests, certainly Kolcheken Kinei would certainly say that these nests are a novelty that people stare at. So obviously they're more noticeable than these cedar poles. Manda Amar Kinei, the one who says nests, Aval Paske de Arza Lo, says that people would not notice that much these cedar poles. So they cannot be, they do not justify placing the crossbeam above 20 amot. Umande Amar Paske de Arza Ma'itama, the one who says that it was cedar poles. Ma'itama Mishum de Nafish Mashche, the reason it attracts the eye is because its length is considerable, which draws attention to it. But if that's the case, the Sukkah de Nafish Mashche, Sukkah also has a considerable length. And yet the sages say that it's not enough for it to attract the eye, and the height of the Sukkah cannot be above 20 amot. So rather, the conclusion is it's not because of the length, ela mishum kevan de kachashiv, because these poles were significant, it leikala, so it becomes famous, and people look at it when they come there. It's important. It's I think because it's so expensive, such a nice thing, so people know about it and they look at it when they go through that entrance. Yeah, like it was a famous thing. And now comes an issue about what if מקצת קורה בתוך 20 ומקצת קורה למעלה מ-20? What if part of the beam is within 20 amot of the ground and part of it is above 20 amot? The beam itself is pretty thick, so it could be that part of it is below, part of it is above 20 amot. Is it okay? No, Korah, the beam, cross beam. No, because it's thick. Yeah. Right? The limit of 20 amot is in the middle of the cross beam. And the same question about the schach of the sukkah. Thick schach of the sukkah. מקצת schach בתוך 20 ומקצת schach למעלה מ-20. Is that a valid sukkah or a valid cross beam for a mavoy? It sounds like a typical question of Rabbi Yirmiyah, but here it's mentioned anonymously. So the Gemara later says that it must be thick enough to hold a brick. If it's very thin that cannot even hold a brick, it's an insignificant crossbeam. No, but now we assume that the schach or the crossbeam must be within 20 amot. The whole thing. So what if only the bottom part of it is within 20 amot, but the upper part is above? So can we just ignore the upper part and just use the lower part, which is within? Okay, so something discusses that, but he would notice it. Right. Right. So it sounds like it should have been okay, but there's an opinion that there's a difference between mavoy and sukkah. Yes. No, mikchat is part of it. Part of the thickness. Part of its thickness. Yeah, right. Is below, and part of its thickness is above. Yeah, the schach is for shade, but also it should be within 20 amot because it should be noticeable. So what if it's only its lower part is noticeable, but not its higher part, upper part? Okay, so that's the question. Should the entire schach be within 20 amot, or is it okay that if part of it is above 20 amot? So Amar Rabba said, "B'mavoy kasher." In case of the mavoy, if the crossbeam is placed so, it's okay. B'sukkah pasul, for the sukkah, if the schach is partly above 20 amot, that's invalid. And now the Gemara inquires, why is there such a difference? Ma'ishna b'mavoy de kasher. How come the crossbeam is valid in a mavoy? Because the Amrin and Klosh, we say, thin it out. Do not view the Korah as an indivisible unit, but instead validate the lower part and ignore the upper part that is above 20 amot. If there is such a way to view, just to consider the lower part, so sukkah nami, by sukkah as well. Lema Klosh, say thin it out and ignore the upper part of the schach, and just the lower part should be okay. But the problem is, if you thin it out, if you ignore the upper schach, so then just the lower part of the schach is insufficient. So it would be one whose sun is greater than its shade. That's an invalid schach. Well, but if that's what you say about sukkah, by the same token, you should say the same about the crossbeam. If you thin it out and ignore the top part of the crossbeam, So then, what will be left, just the lower part of the crossbeam, is a korah that is dislodged by normal wind, which is invalid. The korah should be at least a little bit sturdy, thicker. Rather, how come still we say that the korah is valid? You're forced to say that according to Rabbah, he views the bottom of the crossbeam as if they were metal rods, so which can withstand the wind. If so, by the schach also, you should be forced to say that the lower part of the schach alone is sufficient. So the difference between the korah and the schach is not yet clear. Rather, we must say that it's a rabbinic decree, rabbinic difference. Amar Rava miParzakya, the reason is sukkah de leyachidi, since a sukkah usually belongs to an individual, lo midkar, there's a concern that he might not be aware if the lower part, the lower layer of the schach would be removed, and the only part left will be the part that is above 20 amot. An individual might not notice it. That's why it's invalid. But mavoy de rabbi mavoy that belongs to the public, there are many users who use the mavoy. Somebody surely will notice that. They will remind one another to bear in mind its condition, so there's no such concern. Then, community. Oh, right. So this actually is what the Gemara says in the other version. There's another version of this thing, a reversed version, and that's what it says there. That's the logic there. But here it says there's also an aspect that sometimes an individual is, since if it all depends on one person, if that one person forgets, so that's it, it's gone. But if there are many people who could remember it, so. So that's what the Gemara says later. But now we say that if something depends on only one person, and that person might forget, so you can't trust it. Another explanation for this difference, Ravina Amar, Sukkah deoraita. The height of the schach is derived from the Torah. It's a biblical concept. Because it's a biblical obligation, Achmiru barabanan, the sages were stringent in that and said that even if part of it is above 20 amot, it's invalid. But mavoy, the rabbanan, mavoy, which is just a rabbinic innovation, lo achmiru barabanan, the sages were not that stringent and permitted even part of it to be above 20 amot. So this is one version of this thing. He had the reversed version. Amar Rabba b'mavoy pasul. In case of the crossbeam of the mavoy, it's invalid if part of it is above 20 amot. Besukah kshera, schach is valid as long as even just part of it is below 20 amot. And now the same question on this version also. How come you say that the schach is valid even though part of it is above 20 amot? The amrin and klosh, because we say thin it out, ignore the part above 20 amot, and you're left with a schach good enough below 20 amot. Why can't you say the same about the crossbeam of the mavoy? The mavoy nami leima klosh, say thin it out and just ignore the upper part of the crossbeam. Rather, you say that ikalashta avela korah nitelet barach. If you ignore that upper part, so then the remaining part of the crossbeam, the part that's below 20 amot, would be too weak to be considered a valid crossbeam. So the same thing you should say about the schach. Hachanami ikalashta. If you ignore the upper part of the schach, so then the remaining schach, the part below 20 amot, is insufficient. Rather, you're forced to say that it's still viewed as if its shade were greater than its sun. So too, by the crossbeam, you should view the remaining part, just the bottom part of the crossbeam, like a metal rod. So what's the difference? Here too, there are two differences, two explanations to the difference. Amar Rava miParzakya, Sukkah de leyachidi rami anaf shemiter. Since a sukkah belongs typically to an individual, he takes responsibility and he will pay attention if the lower part will somehow be removed. He'll take care and fix it. But mavoi de rabimi, mavoi that belongs to many people, nobody takes responsibility. Each one relies on the other. Nobody remembers. The Amrinche, like people say, a pot that belongs to partners, to two cooks, is neither hot nor cold. Each one relies on the other cook, and it remains nicht Ravina. Yeah, if two people perform a labor on Shabbat, so then they're both exempt, because if it could have been done by one person and they did it together, so that's a special. Yeah, but still, even if one did a little bit, so then it's like two. Ravina, yes? Yeah, so if it's an organized community, that there's somebody appointed to be responsible, that's something else. But now he speaks about the lifestyle then, that there was no one person responsible. So, like they say, smoch, rely. It's going to be okay, don't worry. Yeah. The Ravina Amar, Sukkah deoraita, since the height of the schach is a biblical concept, lo b'chizik, there's no need for any rabbinic reinforcement. People will be anyway careful to fulfill and to worry that it's going to be in the right height. But mavoy the Rabbanan, mavoy, which is only rabbinic, by chizuk, that requires a rabbinic reinforcement, and that's why the sage is enacted, a safeguard, and disqualified, even if part of the Korah is above 20 amot. No, so what's the conclusion? What's the halacha? Ma yave Allah? So Rabba bar Rav Ula Amar, ze v'ze pasuk, says in both cases it's invalid, but halacha is lenient according to Rava, and Rava Amar, ze v'ze kasher. In both cases it's okay. Sukkah and the crossbeam of the Mavoi, even if it's partly above 20 amot, it's fine as long as at least part of it is below 20 amot, and not even below. It could be even exactly on the line of 20 amot. Because what he says is, halal sukkah nan halal mavoitnan. What we require is the interior of the sukkah and the interior of the mavoi, which means that the space between the floor and the bottom of the crossbeam or the bottom of the schach should be 20 amot. So according to this, even the entire schach could be just above 20 amot. If there's just exactly 20 amot from the floor to the schach or to the crossbeam, it's okay. A very wire. We don't have clocks running around on there. We just use a wire. Yeah, wire is okay because it's tzurat petach. That's something else. There you do not need something strong. There's actually a dispute if it must be straight, or even if it bends a little, it's also fine. There's yeah. So if it bends a little, it might be a problem. And then Amar le Rav Papa le Rava Tanya dim lecha. There's a braita that supports you. The braita says, Mavoi shehu gavoa me-20 ama yoter mipitcho shel eichal. So this braita compares the height of the crossbeam to the height of the entranceway to the sanctuary. Now veichal gufo, the sanctuary itself, chalalo 20, its interior was 20 amot. Right? So the same is by the Mavoi. No, 40 was the antechamber, but the sanctuary was 20. There were two entrances. One was the entrance to the antechamber, that was 40 amot high, and there was an entrance to the sanctuary that was 20 amot high. But now comes a challenge to this. There's a braita that says, How should he do? How should he place the korah? Maniach korah, he must place the korah misfat esrim ulemata, from the edge of 20 and below. It sounds like that the korah itself must be completely within 20 amot. It says milemata, it says misfat esrim ulemata. Sounds like the upper part of the korah must be below 20 amot. So he says, no, ema ulemala. I tell you, it means above. Oh, so that's the next question, Valemata Katani, but it says Lemata. How can you change it? So he says, no, the word below is not meant to say that the korah, the beam itself, must be below 20 amot. No, it's to say that we compare the condition of the maximum height to the condition of the minimum height of the crossbeam, because there's also a minimum height. The minimum is 10 tfachim. So this word lemata is just to inform us that the limit below is just like the limit above. Just like the limit above is that the interior must be no more than 20 amot, which implies that the crossbeam itself could be just above 20 amot and leave an interior of 20 amot full. So too, the limit below must be interior of 10 tfachim. So the crossbeam must be above 10 tfachim for it to be a valid crossbeam. The bottom of the crossbeam must be above 10 tfachim, otherwise there's no interior of 10 tfachim. Well, that's the minimum limit. You can maybe jump above it, but that's the entranceway to the mavoy. So they can either choose to put it very high or very low, but not below 10 tfachim. If you have 10, yeah, that's noticeable enough. The purpose is for it to be noticeable. You can either sneak below it, crawl below it, or jump above it, but it's noticeable. It's considered it's a noticeable thing. If it's 18, that's fine. Yeah, it doesn't have to be 20. Of course, between 10 tfachim and 20 amot, that's a valid height. And now comes a discussion about how do we measure the amma. Typically, amma is 6 tfachim, 6 handbreadths, 6. That's usually an amma. However, in the temple, they used to have 2 types of amma. There was the classic amma of 6 tfachim, but there was also an amma of 5 tfachim. So here comes a statement that says that in halachic matters, we're always stringent. We always take that amma which ends up in a stringency, whether it's the short one or the long one. And Amar Abaye, Mishmei de Rav Nachman, amat sukkah ve'amat mavoy. When we talk about the halachot of sukkah or mavoy, so then be'amah bat chamishait, we're using the amma of 5 tfachim, because that's a stringency in these laws. Amat kil'ayim, there's an amma mentioned in the context of the laws of kil'ayim. There, it's a stringency to use the longer amma, be'amah bat shishat tfachim. And now the Gemara comes and inquires about all 3 matters, sukkah, mavoy, and kil'ayim. How come he says that in this case, this short amma is a stringency, in that case, the long amma is a stringency? How come? Amat mavoy be'amah bat chamisha. Lema ilchita, what's the case that you see that to use a short amma is considered a stringency? So of course, legovo, to measure its height, the maximum height. So if you measure it with a short amma, that's a stringency, because we know that the height is 20 amot. You can either use the short amma, which is 20 times 5 tfachim, which is 100 tfachim, or use the long amma, which is 6 tfachim, 20 times 6 tfachim, which is 120 tfachim. So obviously it's a greater stringency to say that above 100 tfachim is already invalid than to say that it's only above 120. So that's why using the short amma in this context is a stringency. And also, lefirsat mavoy, in the case of measuring the maximum allowable breach in the wall of the mavoy. The Gemara later, page 6, says that if there's a breach in the wall up to 10 amot, it's still okay. It's considered like an opening. But if it's more than 10 amot wide, it's already a breach. It's not, the mavoi loses its title as a mavoi. So there too, if you use the shorter amot, that's a stringency. To say that narrower breach is already invalidates the mavoi. Should be. Yeah, but here you take the shorter one, which is a stringency. But the question is, if you always take the shorter amot in the laws of mavoi, there's one case that it ends up in a leniency. Va'ika meshech mavoi. What about the length, the minimum depth of the mavoi, from front to back? Be'arba amot. There we say that it must be at least 4 amot. Now here, if you take the shorter amot, that's a leniency. That even a shorter mavoi is valid. Delekula. So how could it be that he says that always in the laws of mavoi we take the shorter amot? There's one case that taking the shorter one ends up in a leniency. So there are 2 answers to this. One answer is that he holds like keman de'amar be'arba'at tfachim, that the minimum depth of the mavoi is just 4 tfachim. It does not even reach an amma. So the length of the amma is irrelevant according to this. Alternatively, even if he holds like the one who says arba amot, what he meant to say was berov amot kama. Most amma units in the context of mavoi should be the shorter one because that's a stringency. There is, however, one case where using the shorter one is a stringency, so then you indeed should use the long ones. But in most of the laws of mavoi, using the short ones is a stringency. And then we move on to sukkah. Amat sukkah be'amah bat chamisha lema ilcheta. What's the stringency in using the short amot in the laws of sukkah? Legovha. First of all, it's the height. The height of the sukkah, the maximum height, 20 amot. So just like the height of the crossbeam of the mavoi, if you use the short amot, it's no more than 100 tfachim instead of 120. So that's a stringency. And also, v'ledofen akuma, a bent wall. So I see they have a nice picture here. And that's the law that usually the schach is supposed to be not more than 3 tfachim away from the wall of the sukkah. However, if there is a ceiling or anything that is an invalid schach between the wall and the schach, if its length does not exceed 4 amot, it's considered like dofen akuma, like the wall is bent, it's like part of the wall. So then the schach is not considered to be too distant from the wall, and you can sit under the schach. No, it's not about the height of the schach, it's about the distance of the schach from the wall of the sukkah. So no more than 4 amot. 4 amot. No, it doesn't. The height does not matter. It's whatever the height is, the gap between the schach and the walls of the sukkah. No. Under the dofen akuma you cannot sit because it's considered like part of the wall. So you do not sit under the schach. You can sit under the schach, and the dofen akuma enables you to validate the sukkah and not to say that the schach is too far from the wall, because that would be invalid. But now that you consider this part of the roof like the wall, so you say that the schach is close to the wall. It's a special halakha Moshe Sinai. And that up to 4 amot. So here using, of course, the short amot is a stringency. Because instead of 24 tfachim, it's only 20 tfachim. 4 times 5. But here there's a similar question. If we always use in sukkah the shorter amot, there's at least one case where it ends up in a leniency. What about the length, minimum depth of the sukkah? Be'arba amot delekula. So the minimum size of the sukkah should be 4 amot, according to this opinion. And if you use the short amot, that's a leniency, that even a smaller sukkah is valid. The Tanya, as the Braita says, Rabbi Omer Ani, Kol sukkah she'en ba 4 amot al 4 amot psula. Sukkah which does not encompass an area of at least 4 by 4 amot is invalid. So how come Rav Nachman holds that always the amot of sukkah are the shorter ones, if in this case at least, it's a leniency? Oh, so that's the second answer. The same two answers we have here. First answer is that Rav Nachman holds like the sages, Kerabanan, the Amrei. They say that the sukkah does not need to be 4 amot. Afilu eina machzeket ela rosho verubo v'shulchanon. It's sufficient for the sukkah to just be large enough to contain just one's head and the majority of his body, which is 7 tfachim, and that's the halacha. So the length of the amma is irrelevant for this. Alternatively, it could be according to Rebbe, and when he meant to say that we use in the sukkah the short amot, mostly we use the short amot. In most cases, that's a stringency. But there is one exceptional case where it's a leniency, so there we indeed use the longer amot. Yeah, the legs would be outside, provided your head and majority of the body are inside the sukkah.
Basically, if Amma describes a maximum stringency, and you describe a minimum something, then it's a leniency.
It depends on the context. In some cases, if you use the longer amot, it ends up in a stringency. And in other cases, if you use the long one, it's a leniency. And depends on the type of the law.
Yeah, I think it's when it's within the minimum. If you say the depth of an appointment, the minimum of
4 amot.
Right. So
Right. You're right. If you talk about the minimum, so using the short one is a leniency. If you talk about the maximum, then the short one is a stringency. Right. Shkoyach. Okay, and then we move to talk about kilayim. He also mentioned that in the laws of kilayim, we always use the long amot because there, that's a stringency. And what's the case? Amat kilayim be'amat b'shisha lema ilchita. Now there is, in the laws of kilayim, kilei kerem, a difference between a vineyard and a single grapevine. If you have just a single grapevine, you can plant other seeds at a distance of 6 tfachim away from it. Just 6 tfachim. If you have a vineyard, what's called a vineyard, you have to distance it 4 amot from the vineyard. That's a basic concept in kilayim, in kilei kerem. Now, so there we use the long amot lekarachat kerem in case of the clearing in a vineyard, ve'lemichol kerem, or the perimeter of the vineyard. And now the Gemara quotes the Mishnah from Masechet Kilayim that deals with these two matters. Ditnan, Kilayim chapter 4, Karachat kerem, literally a bold area in the vineyard, a clearing in the vineyard. So Beit Shammai Omrim, 24 amot, you cannot plant there other seeds unless you have a clear area of 24 amot between the grapevines on each side. Ubeit Hillel Omrim, 16 amot. 16 amot are sufficient. Umechol kerem, how large is the space between the vineyard and its surrounding wall constitutes the perimeter of the vineyard? Beit Shammai Omrim 16 amot, Ubeit Hillel Omrim 12 amot. And now the Mishnah itself explains these two cases. Eizoi karachat kerem, what's the boldness of the vineyard? Kerem shecharav me'emtzaito, a vineyard that has been destroyed in its middle. The vines in the middle have been cleared away. So how much space must be there to allow us to plant their other seeds? Im en sham 16 amot, according to Beit Hillel, if there are not 16 amot there, lo yavi zera l'sham, you should not introduce other seed there. Hayu sham 16 amot, if there was an area of 16 amot, noten lo kedei avodato, you should give the vineyard its work area, which is 4 amot, next to each row of grapevines. Then the rest he can plant. What's the perimeter of the vineyard? Ben kerem lagader, the space between the vineyard and the surrounding fence. Im en sham 12 amot, if there's not a space of 12 amot empty there, lo yavizer l'sham, you should not plant there any other seed. Hayu sham 12 amot, if there's 12 amot there, noten lo kedei avodato, you should give the vineyard its work area 4 amot, and then you can plant the rest. Now, if you measure these in a short amot, that's a leniency because you're permitted to plant in a smaller area. So that's why I said in the laws of Kilayim we always use the long amot, which ends up in astringency. But here too, there's a question that there's at least one case, according to one opinion, that using the long amot would end up in a leniency. What about consecutive rows of vines? There, using the long amot would end up in a leniency. And what's the case there? A typical vineyard must have a gap of 4 amot between the rows of the vines. Each row is 4 amot away from the other row. What if there's a vineyard where the vines are more condensed, more denser. Oh. So the Mishnah speaks about that. Is it considered a vineyard or not? And as the practical difference, as I said, is how far must you distance other seed from it? Is it only 6 tfachim or 4 amot? If it's considered a vineyard, you have to distance it 4 amot from it. So the Mishnah speaks about such a case. If a vineyard is planted with less than 4 amot between the rows, Rabbi Shimon says this is not a vineyard. And if it's not a vineyard, you should view each grapevine as it is like an individual grapevine, and all you need is distance of 6 tfachim, and you can plant seeds 6 tfachim away from the vines. But the sages say, it's still considered a vineyard because we view the middle vines as if they're not present. We ignore the middle row, and you obviously do have 4 amot between the other 2 rows, so it's a vineyard. But according to Rabbi Shimon, if we're using here the long amot, that would end up in a leniency. Because he says that it's not a vineyard if the rows are not separated by a minimum of 4 amot. It's a leniency to measure using the larger 6 tfachim amah. Because according to that, you can have a bigger bigger gap between the rows, and still it's not considered a vineyard according to Rabbi Shimon. As you say, if we talk about the minimum, using the longer one is a leniency. So here too, there are 2 answers, the same 2 answers. First answer is that Rav Nachman did not speak according to Rabbi Shimon. Ki Rabbanan, he spoke according to the sages, the Amrei Avikerem, who say that anyway this is a vineyard, so the size of the amad is irrelevant to this case. Alternatively, Rabbi Shimon could be even according to Rabbi Shimon, and when he said that in the laws of Kilayim we always use the long amot, he meant to say in most cases. In most cases of Kilayim, taking the long amot is a stringency. However, in this case, according to Rabbi Shimon, it would be a leniency, so according to him, you should use the short amot. Okay, so that's the way Rav Nachman said. And this was Abaye in the name of Rav Nachman. But Rava reported something else in the name of Rav Nachman, who also distinguished between cases where the long amah is a stringency or a leniency. You should always take the one which is more stringent. However, he did not say that we ever use the amah of 5 tfachim. We always use amah of 6 tfachim. But there are 2 sizes of 6 tfachim amah. How come? All amah units are measured using the amah of 6 tfachim, which is a classic amah. Rather, there's the loose and the tight. A tefach is the length of the handbreadth. So you can hold your fingers tight, that's a short one, and you can hold them loose, that's a longer one. So you can have a longer... No, a fist is an average fist. But an average fist could be either tight or loose. That's a dispute. If it's 8 centimeters, 10 centimeters, you have a... But it can either be tight or loose. Loose is called the sochakot, like smiling. You can have a smiley tefach or an angry tefach. Or sad tefach. So that makes it a little longer amah and a shorter amah. Kmitza. No, there you must hold it tight, otherwise. Yeah. Okay, to be continued.